The voicemail had been sitting in my phone for 11 days. I knew it was there. I had seen his name on the screen the morning it came in, standing outside the newspaper office with my coffee going cold in my hand, and I had made the decision in the span of one breath to let it sit. Not because I was afraid of what he said, because I had learned, after 46 of these, that I needed to be in the right container before I opened one of my father's voicemails, somewhere private, somewhere I could hear his voice without anyone watching my face. The parking lot was empty by the time I finally pressed play. Engine off. The streetlight above my car buzzed, a low electric hum that I had stopped noticing months ago and suddenly could not stop hearing. His voice came through the speaker the way it always did, level, certain, the voice of a man who has never once doubted that the room agreed with him. The biggest birthday gift you can give me is not showing up. A pause. Not the kind that meant he was gathering words. The kind that meant he was letting the first ones land and leave that cripple at home. I sat with the phone in my lap. The streetlight buzzed. Somewhere across the parking lot, a car door slammed and a woman laughed at something her companion said, and the sound of it felt like it was coming from a different planet. I was 31 years old. I had spent 14 months embedded in conflict zones, had filed stories from places where the ground shook and the smoke never fully cleared, had developed what my editor called an unnatural calm under pressure. I pressed my thumb against the speaker grill of my phone until I could feel the vibration of the recording against my skin. He had not called to fight. That was the thing about my father, Warren Calloway. He never yelled. The contempt was always quiet, always certain, delivered the way you would say, pass the salt. Like it cost him nothing. Like I cost him nothing. I was Sloan Calloway, staff investigative reporter at the Asheville Courier, formerly a conflict zone correspondent for a wire service, and I had 47 voicemails from my father saved on this phone. I had worked through most of them in pieces, on bad nights and worse ones. I had a rough taxonomy, but it was not complete. There were ones I had started and abandoned, ones I had moved past too fast and never gone back to properly. I was looking for something specific in all of them, one sentence, one inflection, one half second where his voice softened in a way that meant, I love you without conditions. In 2 years of searching, I had not found it. Number 47 did not change that. I saved it. Of course I saved it. The drive home took 12 minutes. I knew the route without thinking about it through downtown and up the hill, and left at the church with the broken O in the marquee that nobody had fixed in 3 months. And I let the familiar turns do what familiar things do, hold the body steady, while the mind does something else entirely. Gideon was on the porch when I pulled in. He had the outdoor lamp on and Theo's math worksheet spread across his knee, and he was explaining something about fractions with the kind of patience that made it look easy. His cane leaned against the porch railing, catching the light. When he heard my car, he looked up, and something in his face did the thing it always did when he looked at me. It settled, like I was a point on a map, and he was glad to have his bearings. I sat in the car for an extra moment, watching them through the windshield. Theo was arguing about something, the way 10-year-olds argue, with total conviction and zero evidence, and Gideon was listening to the argument with full attention even though he was clearly right. I watched Gideon shift his weight on the porch chair, the small, careful adjustment he made a dozen times a day without remarking on it, redistributing the pressure on his right leg. He had been doing that for 18 months, and he still did not complain about it, not once. I went inside, changed out of my work clothes in the bedroom, stood in front of the mirror longer than I meant to. The scar on my left shoulder had faded from angry red to a quieter pink over the past year and a half. The kind of scar that strangers did not notice but that caught the light certain ways in certain rooms. A bolt had done it. A 3-inch structural bolt that had been improperly seated in a scaffold housing, and when the frame gave way, it had torn through the air with the kind of speed that the body registers before the brain does. Gideon had been faster than both of us. He had been the site foreman. I had been covering a story about a residential development project on the east side, following the crew through their morning, my recorder in my breast pocket and my camera over my shoulder. The scaffold had been up for 6 days. Nobody expected the anchor point to fail. Gideon had been standing 12 feet away when he heard the sound of it going, and he had moved toward me while everyone else moved away. and he had covered my body with his own just before the beam came down. The bolt caught my shoulder. The beam caught his leg. He spent 4 months in the hospital. He would never run again. His right leg would require the brace for the rest of his life, and on bad days he used the cane. And the business he had built over 10 years of general contracting had been restructured into something he could manage remotely from the home office, taking select projects, supervising crews by phone and site visits on good days. He did not talk about what he had lost. He talked about what he was building. My father had been told Gideon was hurt at work. Warren had said maybe he should have picked a safer job. He had never asked about my shoulder. Not once. Not in 18 months. He had never asked how I got the scar, or why I stopped going overseas, or whether the sound of things collapsing in the night still woke me up sometimes. He did not want to know, because knowing would mean that the man he had spent 2 years dismissing had done something Warren Calloway had never done in his 60 years on this earth. Shown up when it cost him something. I was still looking at the mirror when my phone rang. Willa. My sister's voice had a specific texture when she was about to say something she knew I did not want to hear. It went careful, a little higher than normal, the way it used to when we were children, and she was about to tell me Mom was in one of her quiet moods and maybe we should stay in our rooms. I talked to Dad today, she said. I know. I sat on the edge of the bed. I got his voicemail. A pause. Sloan. He just wants what is best for you. The carpet beneath my feet was the same neutral beige it had been when we moved in. I focused on a point near the baseboard. He called my fiancé a cripple, Willa. He is worried. Gideon is, I mean. She stopped, recalibrated. I could hear Todd's voice in the background, low, saying something I could not make out. Then Willa again, a little steadier. Todd says Dad is right. A man should be able to provide. I noticed the way she reached for Todd's words the moment her own ran out. The way our mother used to reach for our fathers. I did not say this. I filed it. 250 people, I said, at Crestwood Country Club, black tie, and I am not on the list. Willa was quiet for 3 seconds. He just needs time. After we hung up, I sat on the back porch with the phone in my hand, not playing anything, just holding it. The night was cool and smelled of the neighbor's wood smoke and something green from the garden that Gideon had started in the spring. I did not hear Theo come to the back door. I did not know he was there until the silence behind me had a different texture, occupied rather than empty. I did not turn around. Warren's voice was still in my head, not the words but the tone, that absolute, unhurried certainty. I pressed my thumb to the screen, pulled up the voicemail folder, 47 saved messages, and I knew I should delete them, had known it for months, and I hovered over the option the way I always did. Then I locked the screen. Put the phone in my pocket. When I turned around, the doorway was empty. Theo was gone, but the door had not fully closed, and I stood there in the dark looking at the thin line of kitchen light showing through the gap, and I had the feeling that I sometimes get in the field, the feeling of something already in motion that has not yet announced itself, like standing in a building and not knowing yet that the walls have decided. I went inside. I made tea. I did not tell Gideon about the voicemail. Not yet. Frank Kettner arrived on a Tuesday without calling first. I was at the kitchen table with my laptop open and a half-eaten sandwich going stale beside me when I heard the truck pull up, a sound I had learned to identify over the past few months. The particular idle of an older engine that had been well maintained, the way it cut off clean. I looked out the window. The truck was dark blue, and there was a small unit decal in the lower corner of the back window that caught the afternoon light. I had seen it once before, briefly, the day Frank had come to the newspaper to ask me something about Warren that he ultimately decided not to ask. Gideon was already on the porch by the time Frank got to the steps. I watched through the window. I did not go out immediately. They talk the way men talk when they are both being careful, about materials, about load-bearing walls, about a roofing project Frank had been overseeing on a property outside of Weaverville. Frank watched Gideon the way people watch someone they have been warned about and are in the process of revising their opinion of. The cane against the railing, the way Gideon leaned forward when he was interested in something, the weight going to his left side without any self-consciousness about it. Frank's face did the thing that people's faces do when the story they were told does not match what they are seeing in front of them. When Gideon went inside to get coffee, Frank turned toward the window where I was standing. I stepped back. He had not seen me. Or maybe he had. I went out. Frank was standing with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the yard. He had silver at his temples, and the posture of someone who had spent years being told his posture mattered. The unit pin on his lapel caught the light the same way Warren's always did. Same pin, same placement. 35 years of friendship expressed in 2 inches of metal. "Your daddy told me the boy was useless," Frank said. He was still looking at the yard. "He is not." "I did not say anything." Frank adjusted the pin on his lapel, a small unconscious gesture, and then looked at me directly. "I did not come here to take sides. I came to see for myself." He paused. "I have known Warren Calloway since we were both 22 years old and terrified and pretending otherwise. I know how he tells the story." Another pause, shorter. "I wanted to know how this one actually went." He left 15 minutes later without drinking the coffee. I stood on the porch and watched the dark blue truck pull away the unit decal, catching the last of the afternoon light before it rounded the corner, and something in the air felt different after it was gone. The way a room feels different after a window has been opened and closed again. Something had moved through. I was not sure yet what it meant. Theo appeared at my elbow. He had been watching from the living room window. The curtain moved just enough. Who was that? A friend of my dad's. Theo looked at the street where the dark blue truck had been, the one with the small decal in the corner of the back window. His eyes stayed there a moment longer than the truck warranted. Then he went back inside. That evening he was at the kitchen table with the family tablet, working on his school project. The assignment was a video essay. The subject was his choice. He had chosen his father. I sat nearby with my notes and tried not to watch, but the audio from his rough cut kept pulling at me, his own voice in the recording. Steady and unhurried in the way that 10-year-olds are not supposed to be. My dad used to build houses. Now he builds them differently. He teaches me that strong does not mean you never fall down. It means you figure out how to stand back up. The footage showed Gideon in physical therapy, early in his recovery, walking the length of the parallel bars with a concentration on his face that I had never seen him use for anything else. Then, Gideon in the kitchen, one hand braced on the counter, the other managing a pot with a kind of focused economy of motion. Then the two of them on the back steps, Gideon's arm around Theo's shoulders, laughing at something off camera. I watched it 3 times before I realized I was crying. I did not know I was doing it until Theo appeared beside me with a box of tissues, held out wordlessly, his eyes on the screen rather than on my face. Giving me privacy inside the gesture, I took a tissue. He went back to editing. I drove to Willa's house on a Saturday morning. I had not called first. Todd answered the door. He was dressed like a man who expected to be photographed, pressed khakis and a collared shirt on a weekend morning, and he smiled at me with the particular smile of someone performing welcome rather than feeling it. "Willa is not really available right now," he said. The door was open approximately 18 inches. I moved past him. Willa was in the bedroom folding laundry. She looked up when I came in, and the expression on her face cycled through surprise and something else, relief, maybe, quickly covered, before settling into careful. "Sloan, I would have called." I looked at the room. The closet doors were open, and the clothes inside were organized by color, labeled sections on the shelf above, handwriting that was not Willa's. The whiteboard by the door had her week written on it in Todd's handwriting. Monday, grocery run, approved. Tuesday, book club, confirmed. Thursday, lunch with Carrie, pending. Friday, dinner with Todd's colleagues, required. There was a meal plan on the refrigerator I could see through the doorway, and a notepad beside the phone with a list of phone numbers labeled approved contacts. I stood in the doorway and looked at the whiteboard for a long moment. Willa kept folding. Her hands moved faster than the task required. "He likes things organized," she said, before I had asked anything. "It is easier this way. I always forget things." "You do not forget things," I said. "You have never forgotten anything in your life." She set a folded shirt on the pile and picked up another one. "It is different when you are managing a household. Mom used to say the same thing about Dad. I kept my voice even. When he decided she did not need to work, when he chose her friends, when he told her that he handled things better than she did. The shirt stopped moving in Willa's hands. She did not put it down. She stood there holding it with both hands, and she did not say anything. And the silence in that bedroom had a specific texture, the texture of a person standing at the edge of something and not yet deciding whether to look down. Todd appeared in the doorway behind me. "Everything okay in here?" "Fine," Willa said. Her voice had gone smooth and automatic. "We were just talking." I left 20 minutes later. Willa walked me to the door and hugged me goodbye with her arms rather than her whole body, the way people hug when someone else is watching. I drove home with my hands at exactly the right position on the wheel and the radio off. A week later, I found the voicemail. I had been going through the archive again. I did this sometimes late at night, the same way some people reread old letters. I was not proud of it. I had developed a rough taxonomy over 2 years, but there were gaps in it. Voicemails I had started and stopped on bad nights, ones I had moved past too quickly and never gone back to properly. I had been working through the ones I had abandoned, filling in the gaps when I found the one with the date that stopped me cold. 18 months ago, 3 days after the scaffold accident. I stared at the timestamp for a full minute before I understood what it was. I had been in the hospital when it came in. Gideon had been in surgery. I had no memory of receiving it, and I had clearly never opened it. It had sat in the archive, unfiled, unheard, for a year and a half. I pressed play. His voice was the same. "Of course it was. I heard you got scratched up at work. You will be fine. You always are." A pause. "But this would not have happened if you had listened to me about that job. I told you those environments were no place for you. Call me when you are ready to come home." The recording ended. I sat with the phone in my hand and I thought about the 4 days I had spent in that hospital. The way the nurses changed shifts and the light through the window changed color, and Gideon was down the hall and I could not see him because they only let family through and I was not yet family, not legally. And so I sat in a waiting room chair for 11 hours the first night, and I called him every 30 minutes until he was conscious enough to answer. I thought about the bolt, and the way my shoulder had felt like it was not part of my body anymore, and the surgeon who told me I was lucky, which was the word they used, lucky. And I had thought about what the word meant in relation to what was happening down the hall. My father had called 3 days after that. He had heard I got scratched up. He did not ask if Gideon was alive. He did not know that Gideon had been in surgery for 9 hours. He did not come. He just said, "I told you so, and come home when you are ready." And ready meant without Gideon. It had always meant without Gideon, and he had been saying it in different arrangements of words for 2 years. I put the phone down on the kitchen table. I looked at it for a while. Then I opened my laptop and I pulled up the article draft and I stared at the title I had written 3 weeks ago, "The Price of Imperfection, When Families Weaponize Disability." I had been approaching it as journalism. Research, interviews, data about how disabled adults were perceived and treated within family systems in the United States. I had good sources. I had numbers that told a clean, damning story. I had not yet written the section that I knew would make the article matter. I closed the laptop, not because I was giving up on it, because something had shifted in me in the past 60 seconds, quietly and without drama, the way a door swings closed when the air pressure in a room changes. I was done trying to make my father hear me through channels he had decided to ignore. What I had to say was going to be documented, clearly, with the precision I had spent 14 years developing, and it was going to exist in the world whether he chose to read it or not. That was the night Warren called. Not a voicemail. Live. I was standing at the kitchen sink when the phone rang and his name appeared on the screen, and I stood there through 2 full rings before I answered, because I needed those 2 rings to put my face in the right arrangement. Not armor, just steadiness. His voice came through exactly as it always did. Level. Unhurried. The voice of a verdict, not a conversation. "Sloan, I have been patient. I have given you time, but I need to say this clearly." He paused. Not for effect. He genuinely believed what he was about to say was a kindness. If you marry that man, you are choosing him over this family. I will not attend the wedding. Your sister will not attend. Frank, Uncle Russell, the Andersons, none of them. You will have nobody from your family in that room. Think about that." He hung up. He had not asked me a single question, not one. He had called to deliver a verdict, and he had delivered it, and he was done. I stood at the sink with the water running and the phone in my wet hand, and I looked out the window at the backyard where Theo had left his bicycle leaning against the fence that morning. The back wheel was slightly crooked. Gideon had said he would fix it on the weekend. I turned off the water. I went to find Gideon. He was sitting on the edge of the bed in the dim room, the lamp off, the brace already on the bedside table where he put it every night before he slept. He had heard the phone call, or enough of it. He looked up when I came in, and his face was doing the thing it did when he had already decided not to make me carry something alone. "He gave me an ultimatum," I said. "I know." He looked at his hands for a moment. "I have been hearing him for 2 years, through walls, through your phone, through the way you flinch when his name comes up on your screen." He looked up at me. "I do not care what he thinks of me, Sloane, but I care what he is doing to you." I sat beside him on the edge of the bed. The room was quiet. Outside, a car passed and its headlights moved across the ceiling and were gone. "He wants me to choose," I said. Gideon was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was even and certain in the way that his voice was always even and certain, not because he felt nothing, but because he had decided before the fact that the feeling was not the point. "You already did. 18 months ago, under a scaffold. You just have not said it out loud yet." I sat with that for a while. Then I went back to the kitchen table. I opened my laptop. I did not open the article. I opened a blank document and I began to write a letter by hand, because some things need the resistance of paper, but I drafted it on screen first so I could see it whole before I committed it to ink. 3 pages. Everything I had not said in 2 years, organized not by grievance, but by truth. What happened on the scaffold, what the surgeon said, what the 9 hours felt like, what I saw in Gideon every morning that my father had never once looked closely enough to see. I wrote it without anger, which surprised me, because I thought I would be angry. I was something else. Tired, maybe, in the specific way of someone who has been holding a door closed for a long time and has finally decided the room on the other side is not worth the effort. I printed it, folded it, put it in an envelope. I addressed it in my clearest handwriting. I put a stamp on it. In the morning, I mailed it on my way to work, and I did not tell anyone I had done it. The article was still on my laptop. I had not looked at it in 4 days. I made coffee. I drove to the office. I worked on 2 other pieces that needed finishing. And I came home and had dinner with Gideon and Theo and listened to Theo explain at some length why his math teacher was wrong about something that his math teacher was almost certainly right about. And I laughed at the right moments, and I felt underneath all of it the particular quality of waiting that comes when you have done something irreversible and are simply giving it time to land. 12 days later, the envelope came back. It was in the mailbox when I got home from work, sitting on top of the electric bill and a catalog neither of us had subscribed to. I recognized the envelope immediately by its weight and shape. I stood at the mailbox and turned it over. My father's handwriting was on the front. "Not until you come to your senses." The seal was unbroken. He had not opened it. He had held the envelope in his hands, and he had written those words on the outside, and he had sent it back without reading a single line of what was inside. I stood at the mailbox for a while. The neighbor's dog was barking at something across the street. A car passed. The afternoon was ordinary in every direction. I took the mail inside. I put the return letter in the kitchen drawer, the one where I kept things I did not know what to do with yet, and I stood at the counter looking at the drawer after I closed it. Then I went to the living room. I sat down. I pulled up the voicemail archive on my phone, 47 messages, and this time I did not hover over anything. I was done trying to be heard by someone who had decided not to listen. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the article draft. I put my hands on the keyboard, and I began to write not from the research notes, not from the interview transcripts, but from the drawer in my kitchen and the buzzing streetlight in the parking lot and the seal on an envelope that had come back unbroken, and the particular sound of a man's voice when he has decided that his certainty is more important than his daughter. I wrote for 3 hours without stopping. When Gideon came to find me, the house was dark except for the lamp beside the couch and the glow of the screen. He stood in the doorway for a moment looking at me the way he did when he was deciding whether I needed company or quiet. I looked up. He came and sat beside me without asking what I was writing, and I leaned against his shoulder, and neither of us said anything. And outside the window the night was going on with its ordinary business. And somewhere across town my father was having dinner in his big house and thinking about his birthday party and his legacy and his family, and he had no idea what was being built in this room. Not yet. The USB drive arrived on a Wednesday in a padded envelope from the construction company's safety office, marked documentation, requested per incident report on the outside. I had submitted the formal request 6 weeks earlier during the initial research phase of the article, not expecting much. Security footage from an 18-month-old site accident at a mid-sized residential development in East Asheville was the kind of thing that got overwritten, archived wrong, lost in a filing system that nobody had designed with retrieval in mind. But it had not been lost. I held the envelope on the kitchen table for a moment before I opened it. I waited until the house was quiet. Theo was asleep. Gideon was in the home office finishing a call with a client. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, and I plugged in the drive, and I found the file, and I pressed play. The footage was from an exterior camera mounted on a pole at the northeast corner of the site. The angle was wide, and the resolution was the kind that told you what happened without telling you everything, shapes and motion clear, faces needing interpretation. The timestamp in the corner read 7:42 in the morning. For 34 seconds, nothing happened. Workers moving, equipment, the ordinary geometry of a construction site at the start of a day. Then the frame shifted, or something in it shifted, a visual wrongness that the eye registered before the brain, and then the scaffold on the east face of the building simply gave way. Not slowly, the way those things go, which is all at once and then faster than that. The structure folding into itself and the workers on and around it responding in the immediate animal way, moving away from the collapse, bodies orienting towards safety by instinct. One body moved the other direction. I watched him cross the frame, 12 feet in, something under 2 seconds. I had never known how fast he moved. I had been on the ground by then, already down, and I did not remember the moment of covering only the weight of him and the sound, which was not one sound, but several sounds at once. And then nothing for a while. On the screen, I watched the beam come down. I watched the specific angle of it, the way the main structural piece caught his right leg and the secondary piece deflected toward where my shoulder would have been. I watched his body absorb what was meant for mine. I closed the laptop. My hands were on the table in front of me, and they were shaking in the small, persistent way that does not show unless you are watching for it. I looked at them for a moment. Then I got up and went to the sink and ran cold water over my wrists, the way I had learned in a field training once for shock. That is not quite shock, and I stood there until my hands were steady. I had lived this. I had been present for every second of it, but I had never seen it from outside, had never had the angle that the camera had, the one that showed the whole shape of what he did, the choice of it, the direction he ran when every other body in the frame chose the other direction. I went back to the table. I opened the laptop again. I watched it one more time. Then I opened a new folder on my desktop and I began to organize. The security footage. The physical therapy records I had kept copies of for the insurance filing. The video Theo had made for school, which he had shared with me weeks ago without making anything of it. I pulled them into the folder and I sat looking at the contents for a long time, thinking about structure, the way I always thought about a piece before I wrote it, what goes first and why, what the reader needs to feel before they can understand what comes next. I did not hear Theo come in. He had a glass of water, and his feet were bare, and he was clearly on his way from his room to the bathroom and had taken a wrong turn toward the kitchen, the way he sometimes did in the half-awake state he occupied in the middle of the night. He stopped when he saw me. Then he saw the screen. The footage was paused on a frame I had gone back to, the moment just before the collapse, the site in its last ordinary second. But Gideon was visible in it, standing near the east scaffold, looking up at something above the frame. His shoulders, the particular way he stood. "Is that Dad?" Theo said. My hand moved to close the laptop. Not fast enough to be convincing. It is for work, I said. Theo looked at the closed laptop, then at me. His face in the low kitchen light was very still, the way his face got when he was processing something he had already half understood. He was 10 years old, and he had his father's way of being quiet when quiet was what the situation required. Okay, he said. He filled his glass of water. He went back to his room. He did not ask anything else. I sat at the table after he left and listened to the sound of his door closing softly at the end of the hall. And I thought about the way his eyes had stayed on the closed laptop for 3 seconds longer than they needed to, and I told myself it was nothing. He was 10. He had been half asleep. He had not seen enough to understand what the footage was. I told myself this. I believed most of it. I moved the laptop to the bedroom and I worked for another hour on the written portion of the article, reading back through the personal section I had written the week before, adding one paragraph about the returned letter, another about the phone call that had come with no question in it, the way a verdict arrives, with nothing left to argue. I wrote until the words felt settled, and then I stopped. When I finally slept, I slept without dreaming, which was unusual, and in the morning everything in the house was exactly as it had been. It was during the article research that I met Margot Sievers. She was volunteering at a community housing forum I had attended to find sources, the kind of event where people sat in folding chairs in a church basement and talked about affordable construction and the contractors who did or did not show up on budget. I was there with my recorder and my notebook looking for families who had dealt with disability in the workplace. And Margot was there because her husband Paul was on the planning board and she had come to support him and ended up running the sign-in table. We talked in the way you talk at those events, standing near the coffee urn while the moderator shuffled papers at the front, half attending to the room. She mentioned their house in passing, a renovation they had done 5 years ago, a kitchen expansion that had doubled the footprint of the back of the house. We had this wonderful contractor, she said. She said it the way people say it when they genuinely mean it, not the polite version. His name was Gideon. Gideon Cross. He built the most beautiful island you have ever seen, solid as anything, and he managed the whole crew like he had been doing it his whole life, which I suppose he had. She paused, stirring her coffee. Then we heard he had been hurt on another job. Saving someone, they said. We sent flowers, but by then he had moved or changed his number and we never heard back. I looked at my notebook. My pen was in my hand, but I had not written anything down in the past 30 seconds. That is a hard thing to hear about someone you trusted with your house, I said. It is, Margot said. Paul still talks about that kitchen. You remember the people who do good work. I did not tell her that the someone Gideon had been saving was me. I did not tell her that the contractor she remembered with such warmth had been reduced, in my father's version of events, to a burden and a cripple and a man who could not provide. I thanked her for talking with me, and I wrote her name in my notebook, and I filed her away, the way I filed everything, carefully, in the appropriate drawer. I did not know yet which drawer Margot Sievers belonged in. I found out later. Vera Ashworth had been editing investigative pieces for 23 years, and she read the way surgeons operate, without expression, without reaction, her eyes moving through the material and her face giving nothing away until she was ready to give something. I sat across from her desk and watched her read, and I did not fill the silence. She finished. She set the pages down. She looked at me for a moment before she spoke. This is your family, she said. Not a question, some of it. Which parts are not? I thought about it honestly. The data. The other families I interviewed. The structural argument about how disability gets weaponized inside family systems that have always run on a particular idea of who counts as strong. I paused. The rest of it is mine. Vera picked up the pages again and looked at the section she meant. The one I had written the night the letter came back, the 3 hours without stopping. She read a passage I knew by heart because I had written it and rewritten it 4 times before I let it be what it was. A father who called the man who saved his daughter a burden, who never asked how she got the scar on her shoulder, who returned her letter unopened, who built his idea of family so carefully around the image of strength that he could not recognize it when it was standing in front of him with a cane. No names, but the truth was there for anyone who knew where to look. The voicemails, Vera said. You have them documented. 47 of them. 2 years of recordings. She nodded slowly. The personal section is what will make people read this, not the data. The data is good and it is necessary, and it will make the piece credible. But the reason someone shares this article with their sister at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night is this. She tapped the page. This is the part that sounds like something they have been trying to say for a long time. We agreed on 2 weeks. The article would run 2 weeks after the birthday party, which gave me time to finish the multimedia component and gave the editorial team time to put it through legal. No names in the text. The family would be identifiable to anyone who had been in that ballroom, but no names meant no liability and, more importantly, no distraction. The story was not about one man, it was about a pattern. Warren was the pattern made specific, but the pattern was the point. I drove home with the windows down. The air smelled of something flowering that I could not identify, one of those spring smells that arrives before you are looking for it. That night, I built the video. I had done documentary editing before, early in my career, and the work came back to me the way physical skills do, through the hands before the mind is fully engaged. I opened the folder and I laid out the elements on the timeline and I began. The security footage first. Faces blurred, the way I had promised the construction company, but the motion was there, the direction of it, the one body moving against the current of all the others. 41 seconds. I let it run without narration. Then Gideon's physical therapy recordings, the ones from the insurance file, shot by the hospital's documentation team and released to us for the settlement. Gideon at the parallel bars. Gideon learning to manage the brace. Gideon sitting in the evaluation room while a woman asked him to rate his pain on a scale and he said 4 when anyone watching could see it was higher, because he was Gideon and he did not want to be a number that alarmed people. I cut these carefully, not for pity, because that was not what they were and that was not what he would want. I cut them for truth, for the record of a man doing the work of rebuilding himself without complaint, without performance, without asking anyone to witness it. Then Theo's school video, his voice first before the image, because the voice was the thing. My dad used to build houses. Now he builds them differently. He teaches me that strong does not mean you never fall down. It means you figure out how to stand back up. I let that play over the footage of Gideon teaching Theo to ride a bike, one hand on the fence, the other hand free. The careful calibration of a father who had decided that his limitations were not going to become his son's ceiling. Then the voicemails. I had selected 8 of the 47, the ones that said it most clearly, the ones where the contempt was most completely itself, unambiguous, unmistakable. I had listened to them so many times that I had stopped hearing them as my father's voice and started hearing them as evidence, which was the only way I could work with them without stopping. That cripple, your little burden, a man who cannot even provide. Come home when you leave him. Come home when you leave him. He said it in 5 of the 8 recordings in slightly different arrangements, as if repetition was a form of patience rather than control. The full video ran 11 minutes and 14 seconds. I watched it start to finish when it was assembled, sitting alone in the bedroom with the door closed and the lamp on its lowest setting. When it was done, I sat in the quiet for a while. I was not angry. I had expected to be angry, had braced for it the way you brace for weather, but what came instead was something that had no good name. Grief, maybe, but grief that had been sitting in a room for so long it had gone still. The kind of sadness that does not move because it has already settled into the shape of the space it occupies. I saved the file. I put the laptop on the desk, not the bedside table. I got into bed. I did not sleep for a long time. Saturday morning arrived. The way ordinary mornings do, without announcement, without any indication that it was different from the ones before it. Theo ate cereal and read something on the tablet between bites, the particular focused silence of a child doing 2 things at once. Gideon was on his 2nd cup of coffee. I was standing at the counter with the newspaper open but not reading it. "Can I go to the party?" Theo said. Gideon looked up. "We were not invited, bud." "But it is family." Theo did not look up from the tablet. "Sloane's family." I folded the newspaper. "Not tonight, Theo." He looked at me then, that steady level gaze, old in a way that 10-year-olds are not supposed to be. The gaze of a child who had learned early that adults made decisions that did not make sense, and that the most useful response was to understand before pushing back. He held it for a moment. Then he looked down at the tablet again. "Okay," he said. He finished his cereal, rinsed his bowl, went to his room. The door did not slam. It closed with its ordinary sound, and that was somehow worse. Gideon looked at me across the kitchen. I looked back at him. "He is fine," Gideon said. Neither of us fully believed it, but we let it be. That afternoon, I made the decision I had been working toward for weeks. I sat at the kitchen table with the article open and the video file beside it, and I said it out loud to myself quietly, the way I sometimes confirmed facts before I filed a story, just to hear them in my own voice in the real air. I am not going to the party. I am not going to crash it. I am not going to confront him in front of 250 people in black tie at the Crestwood Country Club. The article runs in 2 weeks, and the truth will be there for anyone who looks. I was done performing for an audience that had already made up its mind. The article was not revenge. It was documentation. It was the thing I was trained to do, and I was going to do it well and clean, and whatever happened after that would happen without me standing in the middle of it trying to control the outcome. I told Gideon that night. He listened the way he listened, fully, without filling the pauses with anything. When I finished, he pulled me against him and held on and said, against the top of my head, "You do not owe him anything, not even your anger." I stayed against his shoulder for a long time. Outside, the neighborhood was doing its Saturday night business, a car door, someone's television through an open window, the sound of something ordinary going on in every direction. The laptop was on the coffee table. I had not closed it before we sat down. The desktop was visible from where I was sitting, the folder icon, the video file, the article draft. Our home network shared everything to the family tablet automatically. I had set it up that way months ago for convenience and had not thought about it since. Theo's door was closed. The house was quiet. I fell asleep on the couch sometime after 10. I did not mean to. I was simply there, and then I was not. The way sleep takes you when you have been wound tight for a long time and something finally releases. I did not hear Theo's door open. I was not there. I pieced together what happened from 3 sources. Willa, who called me twice that night and again the next morning. Frank, who told me his part of it a week later on the phone, and the video, which someone filmed on their phone and which I watched 11 times in the first 48 hours. What follows is what I know to be true, assembled from those accounts. Crestwood Country Club sat at the top of a long private drive, and on a clear evening in late May, it looked like someone's idea of what a family was supposed to look like, which was probably why my father had chosen it. The chandelier light came through the tall windows and lay in pale rectangles on the manicured grass outside, and the valets moved in their efficient choreography, and the women who arrived wore the kind of jewelry that did not need to announce itself. Willa told me later that Warren stood at the front of the ballroom and shook hands and received compliments and told the same 3 stories he always told at events like this. The ones about hard work and sacrifice and building something from nothing. And the room listened the way rooms listen to a man who has made them feel they're in the presence of earned authority. Willa said Frank Kettner was at table 3 with his wife, near the windows. Margot and Paul Sievers were somewhere toward the middle of the room, people my father knew through the building supply side of his business. He took the microphone sometime after 8, Willa said. The room settled into its attentive arrangement, 250 people in black tie orienting toward the man at the front. "I have always put my family first," he said. "Every decision I have made, every sacrifice, every hard choice has been made to protect the people I love." He named Willa and Todd. He named his late wife Diane, and his voice did something almost soft on her name, the nearest thing to tenderness that Warren Calloway's public voice could manage. He talked about legacy, about building something that lasts, about knowing what you are leaving behind. He did not mention my name. In his version of his family, his 60 years, his legacy, I did not exist. The room applauded. The back doors opened. Not, sir. The double doors at the rear of the ballroom swung open, and the applause was still happening, still rounding off at its edges, and people near the back turned to look with the mild curiosity of people expecting a late arrival. What they saw was a boy, khaki pants and a button-down shirt with the collar sitting slightly off-center, the way it does when a 10-year-old buttons his own collar without a mirror. His hair had been combed carefully, the comb marks still visible in it. He was holding a tablet against his chest with both arms, the way you carry something you have decided is important. He stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at the room the way his father looked at things he was assessing, without hurry, without apology. Frank told me his part of it the following week, on the phone, his voice careful in the way of a man choosing his words with the knowledge that what he is describing reflects on him. He had arrived by the same route he always took, along the road that ran past our neighborhood, a habit of direction he had not examined. He had seen the boy at the intersection at the bottom of the hill, standing on the curb in his khakis and his too large shirt with the tablet under his arm, and something about the image had made him pull over before he had decided to. He had lowered the window. He had asked if the boy was all right. Theo had looked at him. "Are you going to Mr. Calloway's party?" Frank had said yes. "I want to go inside. My dad is Gideon Cross." Frank recognized the name. He had heard it from Warren in one register and seen the man himself on a porch in another, and the two versions had never fully resolved for him. And he sat at the red light looking at this child in his careful clothes, and he opened the passenger door without asking any more questions. He told me he did not know what he was carrying into that room. I believed him. Frank entered first and moved through the crowd with the ease of a man who had been attending events like this for 30 years. Theo came through the doors a few steps behind, and a staff member moved toward him, the polite interception of someone trained to handle anomalies discreetly. And Frank was already inside, and Theo was alone at the entrance with the tablet, and the staff member said, "Who are you here with, sweetheart?" Theo looked at her. "I am here to find my dad. My name is Theo Cross. Sloane Calloway is going to be my stepmom." The staff member looked at him, at the khakis, the careful hair, the tablet, and she hesitated for exactly the wrong amount of time, and Theo walked past her into the room. He knew where the AV console was because he had been to 3 school assemblies that year and set up the projector at 2 of them. He told me this afterward, straightforwardly, as if it were obvious that this was relevant information. He walked to the console at the side of the stage while Warren was still speaking, and the applause was fading, and the young man working the board looked at him with the startled expression of someone encountering something outside their operating instructions, and Theo said, "I need to show something. It is about the party." He said it with such calm certainty that the young man stepped back. The screen behind Warren flickered. The string quartet, which had been preparing to begin again, went still. Warren turned. The room turned. The security footage appeared on the screen, a construction site in the early morning light, a scaffold on the east face of a building, workers moving in the ordinary geometry of the start of a day, and then the wrongness that the eye catches before the brain does, the structure beginning to fail, and the bodies in the frame orienting away from it, every one of them moving away except one body moving the other direction. 250 people watched Gideon Cross run toward the collapse, watched him cover the body of a woman on the ground, watched the beam come down, watched the angle of it, what it took from him, what it would have taken from her. Then Gideon in the hospital. Then Gideon at the parallel bars, learning to walk with the new weight of what had happened. Then Theo's voice, that steady 10-year-old voice that had no business being as steady as it was. "My dad used to build houses. Now he builds them differently." Then Warren's voice, his own voice from his own phone, played through the AV system of the Crestwood Country Club ballroom before the 250 people who had just applauded his speech about family and legacy and protecting the people you love. That cripple. Your little burden, a man who cannot even provide. Come home when you leave him. Come home when you leave him. The room did not react immediately. It absorbed. 250 people absorbing the distance between the man on the screen and the man who had been speaking to them about sacrifice and love 3 minutes ago. The distance was very large, and it was very quiet, and it filled the room the way cold fills a space, not loudly, just completely. Warren stood at the front of the room with the microphone still in his hand. His mouth was open. The sound of his own voice was still moving through the air of the room, and he stood in it, and nothing came out. Margot Sievers at table 7 made a sound. Her hand found her husband's arm. Paul. Her voice was barely anything. That is Gideon. That is our contractor. She was looking at the screen with the expression of a person watching two separate things become one thing. That is the man who built our kitchen. The man we sent flowers to. She looked at Warren then, at the microphone in his hand, and the open mouth and the silence where his authority had been. That is the man he called a burden. Paul looked at the screen, then at Warren, then back at the screen. Frank Kettner stood up. He did it slowly, the way you stand when you are certain of what you are about to do, and you want the certainty to be visible. He was at table 3, and he was standing, and the room registered it, the way rooms register a person standing when everyone else is seated, the attention swinging toward him like a compass needle. Frank told me later that he looked at Warren and thought about 35 years. The gulf, the business handshakes, the matching pins, the idea they had both raised their families inside. He did not tell me what he felt. He did not need to. Frank reached to his lapel, his fingers found the pin. He removed it with the careful deliberateness of someone who has decided that a gesture needs to be unmistakable. He held it for a moment. Then he set it on the white tablecloth and pushed it 2 inches toward Warren's empty chair at the head table. He did not speak. He did not look at the room. He turned and walked toward the side exit, and his wife gathered her things and followed him. And the door swung closed behind them with the soft and final sound of something that does not need to be said because it has already been said. For a moment nothing else moved. Then another couple at table 3 stood. Then someone at table 9. Not a rush, not a scene. The kind of leaving that does not require drama because its meaning is already clear. A quiet and deliberate evacuation. People folding their napkins and pushing back their chairs and making their way to the exits with the measured composure of people who have somewhere else to be. Willa was at the table near the side wall, the table where the family was meant to sit, and Todd was already on his feet beside her, his hand at her elbow, and he said her name in the low, firm voice he used when he had decided something. Willa looked at the screen. The voicemails were finished, but the final image was still there, Gideon on the parallel bars, his face doing the thing it did when it was concentrating, full and quiet and present. Willa looked at that image for a moment. Then she looked at Todd. Then she looked back at the screen, and she did not move. Willa. Todd's voice lower with an edge. Willa sat in her chair and looked at the image of a man she had spent 2 years dismissing, and she did not get up. Todd left alone. My phone rang at 8:47. I had been asleep on the couch, and the ring came into my sleep first and then pulled me out of it, and for a half second I did not know what time it was or why the room was dark. Then I saw Willa's name on the screen, and I was fully awake. "Theo is here," she said. Her voice had a quality I had not heard in it for a long time, something stripped down to its actual shape. At the party, he played a video. I was already standing. The drive to Crestwood took 9 minutes, and I took them fast, and when I pulled into the parking lot it was half empty. Cars still leaving, headlights moving in orderly procession down the private drive. Inside the lobby, the staff was moving through the particular post-event choreography of cleanup, beginning before the event was quite over. And through the ballroom doors I could see the caterers starting to clear, and a few clusters of people still talking in the low voices of people processing something. I found Theo outside, on a bench near the entrance, under one of the ornamental lights that lined the covered walkway. He was sitting with the tablet on his knees and his hands in his lap. His collar was still off-center. His hair had mostly held. He looked up when he heard my footsteps. His face was calm, in the way his father's face was calm. Not the calm of someone who felt nothing, but the calm of someone who had decided before the fact that they could carry what they were going to be asked to carry. "I showed them what Dad did," he said. "Not the leg, not the cane, what he did for you. I stood in front of him. The ornamental light above the bench was warm and it lit the side of his face, and I could see clearly that he was 10 years old and had done something enormous and was holding the size of it with both hands and not dropping it. I knelt down so I was at his level. My throat was doing something that I was not going to let win. "You should not have done that," I said. Theo looked at me. "Somebody had to." I held him. He let me, his arms coming around my neck and holding on with the full, uncalculated grip of a child who trusts completely and has decided this moment requires it. I held on, and the parking lot went on being a parking lot, and somewhere behind us a car started and someone called a name, and the ordinary world conducted its business. And I stayed where I was with my arms around this boy who had looked at an injustice and decided at 10 years old that he was the person who was going to do something about it. After a while, we went to find Willa. The video reached the internet before midnight. A guest had filmed it on their phone, the projector screen visible and clear, the audio picking up both the footage and the voicemails with the particular quality of a room full of people who have stopped making sound. By morning, it had been shared widely enough that Sloane Calloway, investigative journalist, had 17 missed calls and an inbox she could not open without preparation, she being me, I being unprepared. Gideon saw it before I told him. He came to find me in the kitchen the next morning with his coffee and the careful expression of a man who has been handed information he did not ask for and is still deciding how to hold it. "Theo showed them the video," he said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at his coffee. "I did not want anyone to see that footage." "I know. I did not want to be the story." "I know." I looked at him, but Theo wanted his father to be seen, not the version my father made up, the actual one. Gideon looked at the window. Outside, the morning was doing what mornings do regardless of what has happened the night before. A bird. The neighbor's car. The world's complete indifference to the magnitude of any individual event. His jaw was doing something tight, and then it released. "He is 10 years old," he said, and there was something in his voice that was not anger, something larger and quieter than anger. "He is," I said. "He chose to defend you. You can be unhappy about the method." Gideon looked at me. Something in his eyes shifted, the way the surface of water shifts when something moves underneath it. He put his coffee down, and he crossed the kitchen, and he held me the way he had held me that first night in the hospital when they finally let him out of his room, and I was still sitting in the waiting room chair, and he had come and found me there and held on without saying anything. Because there was nothing to say, and he had always known the difference. The professional consequences for my father arrived the way consequences usually arrive when they are earned, not dramatically but steadily. Within a week, 3 major contracting firms that had done business with Callaway Building Supply for years called the office to say they would be taking their accounts elsewhere. Not all of them cited the video directly. 2 of them said only that they were restructuring their vendor relationships. But the industry is smaller than outsiders imagine, and the people in it communicate, and what they communicated was, one of ours was called a burden by a man who was going to profit from our business. And we have decided not to let that continue. My article published on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after the party. Vera ran it with a photo I had taken at a construction site 3 years earlier, a crew working at height in the early light, anonymous and purposeful. The headline was the one I had written the night the letter came back. No names in the text. The pattern was the point. By the end of the week, it had been read enough times that Vera called me to say that 3 other publications wanted to license it, which had not happened to one of my pieces since the conflict zone work. I did not feel victorious. I felt clean, like a room that has been opened to the air after being closed for a long time. Warren called 3 weeks after the party. I was in the car, parked outside the grocery store, and his name appeared on my screen, and I sat with it for 2 rings. Then I answered. Silence for 4 seconds. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then his voice came through, and it was different. Not softer exactly, but compressed in a way I had never heard it, like something that had been taking up a lot of room had been reduced by pressure. "I was trying to protect you," he said. I looked through the windshield at the grocery store parking lot, at the ordinary human traffic of carts and bags and people who had somewhere to be. I thought about 47 voicemails, I thought about a 3-page letter with an unbroken seal. I thought about a scaffold and a bolt and a man who ran the wrong direction. You were trying to protect yourself, I said, from the idea that your daughter chose someone you could not control. Silence. I am your father, he said. You are. And you returned my letter without reading it. You told 250 people that I did not exist. You called the man who put his body between me and a steel beam. You called him a burden. I was not angry. The absence of anger was the most complete thing I had felt in months. I am not angry at you, Dad. I am just done. I ended the call. I sat in the car for a moment. Then I went in and bought the groceries. I did not block his number. I did not need to. He was not a man who called twice. 6 months later, on a Thursday in November, I set the table for 4. Theo had made a paper turkey at school and taped it to the window above the kitchen sink, slightly crooked. Absolutely necessary. Willa arrived with a pie she had made herself, which she announced with a formality that made us all understand it mattered. She had been in the spare room for 2 months, taking one careful step at a time into the shape of a life that was entirely hers, and she looked tired in the way of people doing real work, the good kind of tired. We ate and talked about Theo's school project, which was due before winter break and which he had decided would be about bridges, the engineering kind, because he had developed a recent interest in things that hold weight. We talked about a renovation project Gideon had taken on in Brevard, a historic property with load-bearing issues that he was managing remotely and finding satisfying in the specific way that hard problems are satisfying when you know how to solve them. We talked about small things and let them be large. After dinner, Theo fell asleep on the couch under a blanket with the television on low, the way children fall asleep, completely and without apology. Willa and Gideon were in the kitchen doing dishes and talking about something that made Willa laugh, a real laugh, the kind that does not perform itself. And I stood in the doorway between the 2 rooms and looked at both things at once, my sister's laugh and my boy asleep, and the warm, ordinary light of a house that was full. Across town, at the house on Ridgecrest Drive where I had grown up, my father sat at the dining table. I knew this because Willa had driven past it on her way to us and mentioned it without ceremony, just a thing she had seen. The lights were on, 2 place settings on the table, which meant he had put them there himself, out of habit or hope or some combination of the 2. His house was quiet on a holiday, and he had set 2 places and nobody was coming, and he knew it. He sat there anyway. I went back to the kitchen, and I picked up a dish towel, and I stood between my sister and the man I was going to marry, and I dried what they washed. And the evening went on in its small and sufficient way. And outside the window, the November dark was doing what it does, covering everything equally, the full houses and the empty ones, without distinction or mercy or anything that could be called unkind. I stopped looking for his love in the voicemails. I deleted all 47, not because I was angry, because I finally had a table full of people who never made me search for proof.